I'm Rachel Fetterman, Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Drawings here at the Morgan. Thank you for joining me today for a conversation with Jim Dine on the classical and the contemporary. This program is inspired by the exhibition Conversations in Drawing, 7 Centuries of Art from the Gray Collection. The exhibition brings together 60 extraordinary works on paper collected by Richard and Mary L. Gray. Richard Gray was an art dealer and collector who lived in Chicago, his wife Mary Gray an art historian. Focusing primarily on the human figure, the collection spans the 15th through the 21st centuries and includes sheets produced in Europe and the United States. The chronological breadth of the exhibition and its overall focus on the figure gave us an opportunity to consider the sometimes unexpected affinities and tensions that arise when very different drawings are viewed in close proximity. The most recently executed work in the exhibition is Jim Dine's Thin Red Lips from 2008. It hangs near the earliest work in the exhibition, a portrait from the late 15th century attributed to Francesco Bonsignori. Jim Dine was born in 1935 in Cincinnati, Ohio. He rose to prominence in the late 1950s, playing a key role alongside Klaus Oldenburg and Alan Caprow in creating the first happenings. Although he has been associated with movements such as Neo-Dada and pop art, his diverse body of work in all media defies categorization. In addition to his paintings, assemblages, sculptures, drawings, and prints, he has written more than a dozen books of poetry. His extensive practice, which encompasses a deep commitment to drawing, has been the subject of more than 300 solo exhibitions around the world. One of these exhibitions took place at the Morgan in 2011. Its subject was a series of drawings and a book of prints inspired by the classical statuary he encountered during several visits to the Glyptothek in Munich in the 1980s and early 1990s. These 40-plus works are a promised gift of the artist to the Morgan. Jim, welcome, and thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure.
So I wonder if you might want to start by talking a little bit about this series of drawings, and I'll pull up some images of several of the works.
They begin in the late 80s when I first discovered the Glyptothek in Munich. I had never heard of it. I was in Munich to see the Alte Pinakothek and to see the Dürrs and the Poussin. And then I went over to this museum and I just touched my heart, and was so well done. The installation of the so-called classical work from the ancient world really moved me. And it moved me because I have had this relationship to the ancient world since I was a kid. My mother introduced me to various well-known pieces like the Winged Victory, Samothrace, Venus de Milo. My mother took me to the Art Museum in Cincinnati, and we looked at reasonably okay examples of of Roman heads, etc. Anyway, I went on to be a student at a classical high school. That means from the 7th grade to the 12th grade, everybody else took Latin. I was unable to cut it, but I got it though. I got the idea of that life, and I've been a student of it ever since and been inspired by it, by these nameless, unknown people who did this magical sculpture and who produced for me so many possibilities and so much inspiration. And I saw it there at the Glyptothek that day, and I wanted to come back. So I sat down, and there were chairs around the rooms for students, archaeologists, artists to draw over. I sat down and I started to draw, but it's not very nice because everybody is looking over your shoulder. Not because it was me, they look over everyone's shoulder. So I couldn't take it. So what I did was I got some books from the Glyptothek, and I spent 2 winters in Venice after that, drawing from the books. And then I exhibited them at the Albertina in the late 80s. And a dealer put me in touch with the director of the Glyptothek. She said, you know, you ought to show them there. So I met this man, Klaus Oldenburg, and he was so welcoming. And he said, anytime you want to come, I will open up the glyptotext. So for that rest of that year, I would come to Munich for a couple of weeks, set my alarm clock, get up at 2 or 3, go to the glyptotext, ring the bell. The guard was playing chess with himself. He let me, turned on a light, and I drew till 10 o'clock when the museum opened. Then I'd go home to bed. Then, after a couple of weeks, I'd take the drawings under my arm. I rolled them up. They were very big. Some were 4 feet by 3 feet, I would say, maybe a bit more. But I'd take them back to my studio that I had at the time in London and work on them some more. Then I would come back. So that's the story of my life at the Glyptothek. I also went, because of this, to the other Glyptothek in the world, which is in Copenhagen. And that's where I did one drawing there, which is 7 pieces that you call of the hermaphrodite. But that I had to do in front of people. So it was difficult. It was very difficult. It wasn't as pleasurable, although I loved the 7 views. For me, it's extremely romantic, the ancient world. And I tried to express that with my drawings. But I got it, that it was something I was very interested in. If for no other reason, then if you look at portraits of Romans, you're seeing contemporary Romans, which I thought was really great.
Yeah, here we're looking at a series of drawings called 3 Roman Heads, and this is conceived as a triptych, so they're shown together. And I wanted to pull up the medium line here because you use such an incredible range of unusual materials for these drawings. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I never think about that it's unusual material. I use what's at hand. I mean, I didn't set everything out like automobile enamel and ferric chloride. It was just in my studio, and there were things I felt at the time needed a color or needed that particular medium, and that's what I used. It wasn't to make it an esoteric experience for the viewer or for me. It was just efficacious.
Can you talk a little bit about how you choose the subjects that you draw? So I'll pull up a couple more of the Glyptothek drawings. How do you decide what subjects you would like to draw? And how is it different when you're drawing in person from when you're drawing in from reproductions?
If you draw from reproductions, I find it's more, you can be more accurate because you have more time. Because you can keep going back to the same thing. On the other hand, you couldn't draw from reproductions and not be accurate if you hadn't drawn from life. And so I like doing both. It's a pleasure. They keep asking me how I show my paintings sometimes in Munich and at a dealer, and he keeps saying, I can fix it. Don't worry, Klaus is no longer there. He's dead, unhappily. But I know the director, and you can come and draw anytime. It's over for me. I've done that. I would rather, if I do use a subject like this, I would take it from photographs I've taken or from books that I've blown up the reproduction.
Now, it was in the 1970s that you had a shift in your work, right? Where you really started to go back to figure drawing. And you've always considered yourself a draftsman, and drawing has always been an incredibly important part of your practice. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that period in the 1970s when you went back to figure.
Well, I was born 1935, and about 1936, and not absurdly, or 37, I started to draw. And I've always drawn. For me, that was always the essential thing to do for an artist. It's a little bit simplistic. It probably comes from being a provincial guy, but I felt very strongly that drawing was the key to everything, was the key to all of my practice. And in the early 70s, I just felt I needed to go back to the woodshed and literally teach myself again how to draw. So mainly what I did was I had a model who was my neighbor come in. I lived in Vermont then. She came every day And for 3 years I drew, and I got to the point where I could get maybe 12 drawings a year out of this. That is, I kept erasing and destroying and correcting and collaging, which is the way I work anyway. By the end, I felt free enough to say to my neighbor, I don't need you anymore. I'm on my way again. But it was an amazing education.
So before we get to the slides, so Jim selected a few of the images from the Gray Collection show that he is going to talk to us about today. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you about your work in the show, which is this drawing called Thin Red Lips 2008, which is one of many self-portraits that you've made. Can you tell us a little bit about this work?
Well, as you said, I've made a lot of self-portraits, and I'm a very willing model because I sit still. And as the flesh grows older, I find it very interesting to observe. And the organism changes, and it's a challenge as a draftsman to make something that is not just about me, but about drawing. And this comes from a group I did over 2 years for the Gray family, for an exhibition at their gallery in Chicago. And Dick Gray, I knew, was so involved with drawing, and I knew him, he was a friend of mine, and he had such an inspiring collection, and I wanted it to be, it set a mark for me to rise to. So these were very big. What is the size of this drawing? But it is quite large, isn't it?
It is large. I don't have the dimensions handy, but you can see it here.
But it's like it looks to me like it's about 2.5, 3 feet by 2 feet. And most of the other drawings I made for that exhibition were like that or bigger. I've just been working this year in the pandemic and lockdown in Paris. I've been working on 9 self-portraits that are quite small. They're a little bit bigger than A4, but I keep on working on them every day. I have a lot of time. And it's amazing to me how one's face changes each day and each year, but also how my eyes change and what I pick up and what I see and what I haven't seen before. Because after all, drawing is essentially about looking also, mainly.
How long does it take you to make a drawing like this? Do you work on it in sort of one go, or are you working on multiple works at the same time?
I just keep on. I would keep on till they put the glass on, you know. There's always something to do. I bring to a drawing like this 80 years of knowledge, and I still don't know anything. You know, I find I don't know anything. It's always, I could do it better. I could correct it. I see something that the way the organism is put together, that becomes so interesting. I could be sitting across the room and be talking to someone and look across the room at a self-portrait, and I have to get up and do something, make a mark to correct. Everything I do is about correcting.
Is it sometimes painful for you to see your work installed in a show and know that you can't change it anymore?
When I see a work of mine in the show, I'm slightly detached. Otherwise, I would go nuts. You know, it's never right.
Yeah. So now I thought we could move ahead and start talking about some of the works that you've selected from the show to talk about. So the first one is this work by Giorgino.
Well, I mean, I don't think I could speak specifically. I can only speak viscerally. And this work is just incredibly beautiful. And that's why I chose it. I mean, the use of the red chalk and the light and the dark. And listen, if I could do that, you know, I'd do it, give anything to do that. that's really about drawing. It's it's Christ crowned with thorns, but it's really about the use of the red chalk and looking at the subject and the knowledge that he had of how to compose these two figures like this. And you feel Christ as opposed to this other guy. You feel something. He was able to give you two different personalities. He was able to give you the weight of the body. That's it. That's what I think.
Yeah, I really love the way the crown of thorns is. It's almost like you would rather see that drawn than painted. It makes more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like hair. It would be a beautiful etching, for instance.
Have you ever used red chalk?
Yeah, along with automobile paint.
All right, so we'll move on to another image.
I only chose this Canaletto because I love Venice. There's plenty of other more beautiful drawings in the show, but I thought I was very nostalgic for it. And
this is one of the very few. There are a few works in the show, a few landscapes, or I guess cityscapes in this case. The show is predominantly around the human figure, but there are several.
Yeah, well, this is a beautiful depiction of San Marco. It's really, really great. And the Ang I chose because he's another benchmark for anyone who draws. The sophistication of line, the sureness of line, the beauty, and the spareness of what he's done. And I'm not one to like things that aren't emotional, but he's been able through spareness to give us the attitude of this woman. And it's quite an accomplishment. And I just thought I'd like to have it.
Yeah. What's amazing about these types of portraits that Ang made was that these were things he made when he was in Rome. They were drawings that he made for tourists, basically, to make money.
Yeah.
And they're so incredibly extraordinary.
Really extraordinary. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think Ang is one of these figures who was so influential among his contemporaries, but really even more so among artists in the 20th century who were inspired by the spareness of his line and the kind of economy which he was able to.
It's also the sureness of his line, and this guy really had confidence in his hand. And this one it almost looks like a silver point. Really, really something.
Yeah. So is there something that is specifically, because I know you've said that you've been very inspired by 19th century French drawing. Is there something specific in your own practice that you take from Ang?
Well, I try to look harder. I try to be more rigorous with myself and my hand and my eyes. That you can take that from Ang.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, but this idea of Ang as this kind of, a classical artist. And when artists in the 20th century were looking to classical models, so I'm thinking of someone like Picasso or Leger in the 1920s, during this period after World War I, where there was this so-called return to order, and artists were seeking a kind of stability and harmony in their work. Ang was one of the artists they looked to. And at the same time, they were also looking back to Greco-Roman antiquity. And so we were talking a little bit earlier, I'm always interested in how this idea of the classical is so elastic, and so that it encompasses the works of ancient Greece and Rome, but it also encompasses Ang. And why is that? What is it about the classical? It's this very elastic envelope that so many different kinds of works are.
Well, also the way he draws is like sculpture. It's a depiction also of a young woman, I know, but it could be carved sculpture. He was that accurate and able to depict the person with a great stillness.
So another of the artists that I know you greatly admire is Matisse, and we have a couple of
I admire him really greatly, and I I find him misunderstood, particularly in the 20th century. He was, I believe, in America, because I believe he was an artist of not just great emotion, but of great self-doubt. And I think what looks like a smooth, easy trip on through drawing is really his constant correcting and constant insecurity about the drawing. So there is a brutality to Matisse that no one talks about. It doesn't, because it doesn't suit the critics who felt he was an apologist for what was going on with color field painting, for instance. I think he was I think he had more in common with Max Beckmann, and I think, for instance, and I think he was a really one who was possessed, was constantly fending off demons. That's my own potty theory, but I really believe that. And I think he's been misunderstood, and everything isn't always the piano lesson. It's the hard work that he did and the struggle in every piece. Therefore, I love him. And I think also his use of charcoal, the use of charcoal is extremely expressive and organic. You feel his hand at all times. I'm grateful to him. I'm really grateful to him. It's a beautiful piece.
It is. This is beautiful. And this is one of the works that the Morgan will be having as part of its collection following the run of the show. So we're very excited about that. This is part of a body of work that Matisse made that was published as a book called Themes and Variations. And it makes me think of what you were saying, that Themes and Variations is basically he would do these charcoal studies like this one, usually of a woman in an interior, and then he would progressively distill the image until it became a very economical line drawing. And it really makes me think of what you're saying about the kind of the worksmanship. He's not a young man right now, but this idea that he's constantly working to train his eye and his hand, and that he's not sort of content to rest on his laurels.
Exactly. I think so. I think it was always a new thing for him. It was always fresh. And that's the struggle, of course, to keep it fresh.
I think that's true. And I guess that's something of when we think about the academic style drawing versus, something like this, I think there's a degree mastery that can come with drawing where you can achieve something like an academic style, but it can be still lacking in something. And I think to keep the drawing fresh seems to be what you're saying, that's the real challenge.
Yes, and that was the challenge he made for himself. And I think it's always, sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, and like life.
So here we have this beautiful drawing by Rodin.
It looks beautiful to me.
So this is one of the drawings that Rodin, one of the many, many drawings that Rodin made of models. He basically had models just kind of walking around his studio, and he would capture them in these spontaneous poses. So why did you select this particular drawing?
Because it's the only one you showed me of Rodin.
It's the only one we have.
I love Rodin's drawing just because of that. I mean, it was like, you can't get enough of his drawings,
Yeah, this one's really beautiful.
They're really sure. The guy, he had a lot of confidence. Come on.
He certainly did. And this is actually the third in a group of drawings. So this is not sort of the first pass at this pose. This is actually the third pass at this pose. And so he's even already, it's not one of these, one-off kind of drawings. So this is a pose that he seemed to really respond to.
Rodin or me?
Rodin.
Yeah.
So what I was saying earlier was that this seemed to be a pose that Rodin really responded to. And what I find interesting about Rodin's drawings is that the poses are very unheroic in contrast to the kinds of things that you would see in ancient sculpture. They tend to be these kind of very ordinary poses, almost like avant-garde dance, that's really much more interested in the everyday kind of poses. And that's what these Rodin drawings make me think of.
Well, they don't make me think of that. They make me think of how much he knew about the human body and how he was able to use the human body to invent.
From your perspective, because you've worked from models, but you've also worked from sculpture and you've worked from reproductions. So when you look at so many of the works in this exhibition, we have a real variety, works that were drawn from live models, but then probably more that were drawn from sculpture. When you're looking at something that was drawn from a live model, does it have a very different feeling for you than something that was drawn from a sculpture?
Well, if I know that, yeah, one's alive and one isn't. And that's what I mean. This guy knew everything. He knew everything.
Thinking of someone like Rubens, who would draw from sculptures, but was still very attentive to trying to make it feel like it had life in
alive. Yeah, I know. No, I prefer Rodin.
And so did a lot of artists. He was a very influential artist to those who came after him. So and now this is something different.
Well, when you see it on your screen and you don't know it's paper, it could be a painting. So I find it difficult to call it a drawing. Klein I'm a child of abstract expressionism. So he was a wonderful, wonderful inspiration to me and something to be aspired to. And I'm romantically attached to this work, but it's not for me about drawing, it's about painting.
So how in your perspective does this or does this not fit into a collection of drawings?
Well, it fits in because it's on paper.
Right.
But that's the only way.
It's more of a technicality.
Yeah, it's a technicality. It's a study for a painting, and it looks like it. And it's Franz Klein, so I think it's great.
Your career trajectory is really fascinating to think about. And one of the things that I think is interesting about your practice and how committed you are to drawing is that you'll invest the same amount of care into a drawing of Pinocchio as you will a drawing of an ancient sculpture at the Glyptothek. Can you talk a little bit about your subject matter?
Well, it's all about drawing. It doesn't matter if it's Pinocchio or something from the Glyptothek. If you cannot make the drawing work, and if it doesn't move someone, well, then there's, it doesn't matter what the subject matter is. Just that.
I wanted to also bring this drawing, it's not one of the ones you selected, but it's by Klaus Oldenburg, because I know that he was someone that you worked closely with in your career and someone you've also said very wonderful things about his skills as a draftsman. This is one of the drawings in the exhibition.
Well, he was very, when I first met Klaus, he's 6 years older than I am, and he was already formed, educated, cultured man who could draw. And and paint. The paintings I saw in those couple of years I knew him were like Louis Corinth, very much like Louis Corinth. But he could really, he was so glib with his fingers. And he knowing him and knowing how intelligent he was about art and about making art was a big plus for me as a young man.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to view an artist like Klaus Oldenburg as someone who, because he was so interested in pop subjects or ordinary objects, the way that he renders this typewriter eraser, which is something that has personal resonance for him, because when he was a kid, he used to play on his father's typewriter and he had sort of an early foray as a journalist. But the way he renders this, it could be a figure of Christ. It looks like an old master drawing. It's just so masterful.
Right. I agree. He was the first really intelligent, talented artist I ever met. And he inspired me to go on. Because of him, I did.
When students of art history are learning about Klaus Oldenburg, or they're learning about you, and their introduction to you is through your earliest work, which was this very raw performance-based work in the late 1950s, Do you think that they should be surprised that you're such a classicist, or are those two things completely compatible to you?
Oh, I don't care. I am what I am, like Popeye said. It doesn't matter. I'm 85 and this is who I am. So
Yeah.
that's,
Do you view the work that you do now as in any way incompatible with that earlier work, or do you view your whole career as sort of a piece?
no, it's me doing it. So it's not incompatible.
Yeah.
It's all of a piece. It's all of a piece.
I just wanted to show this this Karachi drawing also, because this is one of the works in the exhibition that is so much inspired by classical statuary. And I just thought it might be interesting to bring this up and to get your thoughts on this.
No, it's very nice that he put the foot there too.
Yeah.
The extra foot and the extra face gives it a more casual quality, which is nice. Very nice.
One of the things that we look for in drawings like this, something that's different. There's a difference between a drawing like this and your drawings, which are completely, they're fully independent works in and of themselves. You don't make preparatory drawings.
Right. I never did. I insist that it work. So I keep on, and the drawing grows, or I put a hole in it. You just don't know how it will grow.
Do you put holes in a lot of your works?
Yeah, and I patch them. It's just all about correcting.
And then I thought I would just bring this work. I mean, again, just thinking about this classical through the ages, and of course this neoclassical drawing for a painting. What does this bring up for you?
Very little.
You don't respond to this type of work?
No, not particularly. It's okay, but it's not like the Matisse you showed.
What you're looking for in drawing is more expression.
I'm looking for that in life, dear.
Paul Gray says, Jim, it means a great deal to me that you are taking time today away from your own work, which I know is the source of everything grounding in your life, to discuss these drawings my parents collected. Your insights are always profound. That we are so engaged today, brought together by a mutual love for drawing, would have so appealed to Richard.
Well, that's nice.
That is very nice. Do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship to Richard Gray?
It wasn't every day, because he was in Chicago and I was in New York, but it was always a pleasure to talk about drawing and then to see the collection. And also, he was someone who cared about my work, and so I appreciated that.
We have a question about if you can expand a little bit on the self-portraits that you're working on now. How do you see or observe the detailed and fine changes that you mentioned in your eyes and in your face and in yourself?
Well, I'm using only an 8B pencil. I've limited myself to that. I'm using an 8B pencil. I'm using a kneaded eraser, and I'm using an ink eraser, the kind that you use it's got a little sand in it. And I use sanding blocks, and I use my fingers a lot to move the 8B graphite around. And it makes it very malleable, and it's possible to correct it and still see my tracks, which I always enjoy seeing myself. I like process.
There's another question about the size of these drawings, and I don't have the dimensions on me now, but these are quite large drawings. Do you want to talk a little bit about scale and how you decide what size you're going to work on? And I think one thing that's unusual in your work is how big some of your drawings are.
It just depends how you feel. It depends what kind of paper you got in your studio, and depends how ambitious you feel, and if you can raise your arm above your head, not absurdly.
So are the self-portraits that you're working on now, or what size are those around?
Like I said, they're about maybe 10 or 12 wide by maybe about 14 high.
Okay.
Some much smaller.
Yeah, so the much smaller than these drawings that we're looking at now.
Yes, much smaller.
So I have another comment. I have loved looking at your work my whole life, so thank you. I've recently read through and looked at the images in your illustrated book, Jewish Fate. Would you be willing to talk about what motivated these images and words?
Since no one else probably knows it, I'll just quickly, the images are of tools that I've used and drawn all my life. And the poem, Jewish Fate, I wrote about 4 years ago, and it's rather autobiographical.
Did you want to talk a little bit more about what motivated those? No?
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay. So another question about what kinds of papers you use.
I use anything that I can get my hands on that will take what image I'm thinking of at that moment. I try not to use things that will disintegrate and aren't archival, but you never know. You really never know.
And you do treat your papers pretty roughly sometimes, right? Because
sometimes only because I'm correcting, and therefore I use a stout paper most of the time. For instance, I couldn't really draw on a Japanese mulberry paper of any kind. It wouldn't be for me. I print on them, but I could never draw on them.
And you've worked on handmade papers before, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. I mean, some handmade papers are great. Others are more about the paper than about what the person is going to put on it. So it doesn't matter. It's what's appropriate matters, and how you can manipulate it.
You're in Switzerland now and you're working in a foundry. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing now?
No, I just began it. There's nothing to say except it's great to work in a foundry. I feel very comfortable. I feel very comfortable in foundries, and I'm devoted to bronze casting. So, but I've just gotten here. I mean, last 2 days ago. So I can't talk about it now because I don't know what's going to happen.
How long?
You never know till it's finished.
And do you have any other comments that you want to make? Because I think that's just about the end of our questions. Is there anything else that you'd like to?
I'm talked out.
You're all
talked out. Yeah.
All right. Well, we got one more comment. Someone saying that they've always loved your Venuses in all sizes.
Well, that's nice of them. Tell them I appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jim. We really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.